Aloha! Welcome to 3 Levels of Enlightenment. This is program 1.4, a continuation of the 2012 reversal of the direction of rotation of the planet Earth. This is the 4th program at the first level in a series sponsored by the United Galactic Federation of Planets, or UGFP, as you can see in front of me. My name is Merlin, and I'll be your tour guide. We're coming to you from the Gilbert Ray Campground in Tucson Mountain County Park here in Tucson, Arizona. Standing behind me is my good friend Roy, and on my left is his partner Dale. Roy and Dale are giant saguaro cactuses, magnificent creations of nature that are found in this part of the world. Over the past 12 years, my wife Moana and I have been given information concerning our world and future events. We always share this information with everyone we know, but when the event occurs, they then forget and ask us, why didn't you tell us? By producing these videos, we can now say, we did tell you. The information in this particular program, the 2012 reversal of the direction of rotation of the planet Earth, has grave implications. But this information is not meant to frighten or scare you, it's merely meant to inform you. But if you take nothing else from these programs, we hope you will come away knowing that you and the rest of us are truly loved by the millions of others beyond our world. In the words of our sponsors, may this message fill you with joy, serenity, and determination. I'd now like to explain why these programs are entitled the 3 Levels of Enlightenment. Our sponsors are sensitive to the feelings and beliefs of all of you. Our sponsors do not want to offend anyone, so as a precaution, the programs have been sorted out into 3 categories, levels 1, 2, and 3. Level 1 is for all audiences and is rated PG-13. No one should be offended by the information offered at this level, but parents are cautioned that this level may not be appropriate for young children. Level 2 is only for people who believe in angels and is rated R. It is not for children. Adults who don't believe in angels may also be offended and are cautioned not to watch. Level 3 will definitely offend certain groups and is rated XXX, XXX. It is absolutely not for children, and it is likely not for some adults. The groups that will be offended include 1. People with a strong belief in religion, 2. People with a strong belief in science, and 3. People with a strong belief in what our government officials have told us about our world and the things that are happening. Anyone in these groups should not watch. If you tune in after the show has started, when the level was first announced, you'll still be able to identify the level being discussed in several ways. On the board behind me are the words level and number, corresponding to today's program. The tray in front of me has a placard with the letters PG-13. This is the level 1 program, and it's rated PG-13. During the programs that are levels 2 or 3, the tray in front will have placards indicating R or XXX respectively. In addition, you will be able to determine the level of the program by the shirt that I'm wearing. If it's a level 1 program, I'll have on a Hawaiian shirt. If it's a level 2 program, I'll have on a plaid shirt. It might be a large green plaid, like this shirt, a small green plaid, like that one, a small brown plaid, or a large blue and brown plaid. But if it's a plaid shirt, it's level 2. It's only for people that believe in angels. If it's a level 3 program, it'll be a white shirt. So please evaluate what levels might cause you to be offended, then watch accordingly. This disclaimer will be provided for the first few programs at each level, then it will be discontinued in the interest of saving time. We look forward to posting these programs on the internet, where we're often restricted to 15 minutes per program, so in order to pack in as much information as possible, time is of the essence. I would now like to share with you our humble story. My wife and I have homes on the Big Island of Hawaii, in Northern California, and here in Tucson, Arizona. It turns out there's an important connection between all 3 locations. My wife is a pure Hawaiian. She's a great-granddaughter of the first king of Hawaii, Kamehameha the Great, and she's a great-grandniece of the last king and last queen, King Kalakaua and Queen Liliuokalani. Her genealogy turns out to be another very important part of our operations. My wife served in the Army in the 1960s and is a Vietnam-era veteran. She's a graduate of the University of Hawaii and operates her own business in Hilo, Hawaii. I was born and raised in Michigan in the palm of the hand, right about there. My family moved to Southern California in 1964 and then moved to Northern California in 1966, where I finished high school and attended college. I served in the Navy in the 1960s and am also a Vietnam-era veteran. I then served 23 years in the Air Force Reserve from the 1980s until the mid-2000s. I retired from an airline over 8 years ago. During my 35 years of flying, I've been a pilot, a flight instructor, and an aircraft mechanic. I've flown as a captain, a co-pilot, and a flight engineer, and I've worked for companies as a chief pilot and a director of operations. I've logged more than 30,000 hours of flight time in everything from little Cessnas and Pipers all the way up to the big jets. I've also retired from a fire department of a major city on the West Coast. I worked for the FAA as an aviation safety inspector between the fire department and the airline. All of my careers restricted me from having a full beard and long hair, but our sponsors say that it's necessary that I let my hair grow out, even though I consider it to be quite a nuisance. This is the second marriage for both my wife and myself. We celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary on March 25th, 2011. My wife has 6 children from her first marriage, and I have 4 children from my first marriage, plus we've been blessed with 22 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. As an airline pilot and as a fire captain, I've had to make quick and intelligent decisions because people's lives were often at stake. So I've had to have my feet planted firmly on the ground, and I'm one of the last people you'd expect to be involved in any kind of New Age thinking. So even though I may seem like an unlikely candidate for this job, my wife and I consider it a great honor and privilege to have been chosen to receive this information over the last 12 years. In our attempt to prove to you that our Earth is in for a reversal of its direction of rotation, I need to provide facts, information that's already in the public domain that you can then interpret to see if maybe there's some truth to all this. One of the facts has to do with the magnetosphere. Oops, gotta watch my spelling here. The magnetosphere is an area of energy beyond our planet that involves lines of force. They come out of the poles on the planet and reach out into space and look something like this. A little too big on that side. But our planet has a north pole and a south pole, and the magnetosphere then comes from those 2 poles and goes back in. Well, our scientists have discovered that it's collapsing. The magnetosphere is drawing down, and they now tell us there's been a breach in the magnetosphere. This was put out by NASA Science, but it says giant breach in Earth's magnetic field discovered. This was on December 16th, 2008. It says NASA's 5 Themis spacecraft have discovered a breach in Earth's magnetic field 10 times larger than anything previously thought to exist. Well, in the first program of the reversal of direction of orbit of Earth, we talked about how the poles are going to change places. And in order for that to happen, the Earth has to reverse its direction of rotation, and then the poles will swap. Well, you might expect we should start seeing symptoms of this coming, and by having a giant breach in the Earth's magnetic field would tell us something's going on with the poles and our magnetosphere. Now, this could have implications in a lot of ways. Pilots use compasses to navigate. We already know that the North Pole is moving. It's traveling about 40 miles a year towards Moscow, Apparently the rate of movement is increasing, but it's caused some airports across the country to renumber their runways. For instance, in San Jose, we have 2 runways, runways 12 and runways 30. The headings, the numbers, relate to the magnetic compass readings, and runway 12 is actually 120 degrees, which is east is 90 degrees, 120 degrees is down from that. So this is east, southeast, and then runway 30, is actually on a heading of 300 degrees, which is northwest. I'm sorry, west-northwest. Well, what's happening is, as the North Pole moves and the magnetosphere changes, it causes these magnetic headings to change. And some airports around the country are discovering that as that North Pole moves, they're going to have to remark their runways. Down in Florida, they've had to remark a couple runways down there. In the case of San Jose, if the North Pole keeps moving towards Russia, it means the compass is going to start pointing more towards the west from San Jose. So then runway 30 may end up becoming runway 29 as the magnetic heading changes to 290, and then runway 12 will be the reciprocal of that, which will be runway, as 120 becomes 110, then this will become runway 11. So in that regard, it's affecting our operations for airports, but it's a sign that something's going on. The pole is moving, magnetosphere is collapsing, and on the animal side of the story, it may be confusing animals. We have birds that normally migrate, often from North America to South America in the winter times. The Canadian geese used to migrate. Well, they've stopped migrating in some areas, and now they're camping out in school play yards and on golf course fairways. And geese, when they poop, make a big mess, so they've created all kinds of problems for greenskeepers at golf courses when they poop on the greens, and also for the poor kids that try to go out and play. Other animals seem to be confused. The bees are having a heck of a time. Not only are they disappearing, but they may not be able to find their hives as this magnetosphere starts to collapse. So it's just part of the signs of something coming. The next subject I'd like to talk about are Yardangs. That's spelled Y-A-R-D-A-N-G-S. Here's another one you can look up in Wikipedia. This is a Turkic word that talks about objects, usually in desert areas, that are carved out of the landscape. What you're looking at is a computer generation of the topography of the western United States. On the left side is the Great Central Valley of California, and over on the coast you can see the San Francisco Bay Area, and then to the right we have the Great Salt Lake and the Bonneville Salt Flats to the left of that. The Great Salt Lake is that black area. And then you can see all the mountains that are between Utah and California. The mountains are north-south oriented, separated by many valleys. Well, if you also look a little closer, you can notice how the eastern faces of the mountains seem to be dark, and then the western sides are lighter, and the dark sides are shorter in width than the lighter western sides. Well, there's a reason for all that, and I'd like to explain it to you. Yardangs are normally associated with wind erosion. I don't believe anyone's ever considered the possibility that Yardangs could be caused by water erosion as well. Wind is fairly common on this earth, as it blows all the time, whereas water in large amounts isn't usually found moving over the surface of the earth, but maybe it has. The description of Yardang from Wikipedia is a streamlined hill carved from bedrock or any consolidated or semi-consolidated material, and when viewed from above resemble the hull of a boat. Well, that's the fun part about Yardangs. If you guys have ever seen a rowboat, it'll often have a stern on one end, and then it'll have a keel, and then it'll have a left side and a right side. That's a little tweaked. Let's straighten this out. Please bear with me on my artistry here. Let's go to here and then across. So there's our rowboat turned upside down, and the idea is that the wind comes from this direction and it hits the stern of the rowboat and creates a flat face. And then as it grinds down all the rocks and other material, as the abrasion wears away at it, then all the little pieces go flying off downwind and create this tailing that follows the flat face. In our desert Southwest, down here in Arizona, we'll have Yardangs that are created from hills. They'll get blown on by the wind, and one side gets nice and smooth and flat, and then the other side has all these pieces that are carried off and deposited. On the planet Mars, when our first landers arrived, the Voyagers, they discovered lots of Yardangs. Mars has an atmosphere, and it does have prevailing winds, and it ground the rocks on the surface and created Yardangs. Well, what if Yardangs could also be created by water, by enormous amounts of water, as in a 4-mile-high wall of water moving across the continent? Well, we just saw in that earlier picture provided by U.S. Geological Survey how the mountains in the western United States all seem to be lined up from north to south with their eastern faces pretty much perpendicular to the continent. They're lined up on the continent. Well, if there was a wave before the next one that's coming, it would have come from the east, and as that wave moved across the continent, it would have picked up all the material on the eastern side of these mountain ranges and carried it over the mountain and then deposited on the western side, and it would have created Yardangs. If you've ever driven up US 395 from Los Angeles to Reno, it's on the eastern face of the Sierra Mountains. For about 250 to 300 miles, the Sierra Mountains come right straight up out of the landscape, and they rise a mile or more in height, and the distance that they rise is just a few miles. So it's a vertical face as you go up to Reno. It's amazing to look at. But then as you cross over the Sierras and head down into the Great Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, the mountain tapers over a much greater distance. It may take you 50 to 60 miles to get down to the valley, in the same distance that you would have only gone a few miles on the eastern side. And the same thing with the Rockies. If you've ever been to Grand Tetons National Park, those Rocky Mountains come right straight up out of the prairie. It's one of the most spectacular sights you'll ever see as you're driving across Wyoming, and all of a sudden you have this huge mountain range right in front of you, and it just kind of like shoots right up out of the ground. Well, that's typical of a Yardang, and that's typical of water erosion from a giant wave that came across the continent some umpteen thousand years ago, coming from the east to the west and creating all those faces? Well, as we talked about in earlier programs, the Earth is coming up on a polar reversal, on a reversal of its direction of rotation. And as Stephen Hawking told us, objects that are not tied down are going to keep right on going, 1,100 miles per hour. Well, we're rotating counterclockwise, and all that water is rotating along with us. And if this Earth is going to come to a full stop, that water is going to come right up out of the oceans and cross right across the continents. But this time it's going to go from west to east, and it will create new Yardangs, where it picks up all the material that was deposited from the last wave, umpteen thousand years ago, and carries it over these mountains and then deposits it on the other side. So in the case of the Grand Tetons, they will disappear. Jackson Hole, that whole area, will then go underground, and a new mountain terrain will be created where you might say the Grand Tetons will be on the other side of the mountain as opposed to where they are now. And the same with the Sierras. All that dirt that tapers its way down to the Great Central Valley will be picked up and carried over on the Reno side. So then the Sierras will taper down to the Nevada desert and have a steep face on the western side. Here's another little hint as to what we might expect, what we might see in this process. If any of you have ever gone gold panning, especially in the rivers in California, you know that one of the easiest ways to pan is to use a sluice box. One way is to pan with a gold pan. You can only work a small amount of material at one time with a pan. But if you set up a sluice box, you work a lot more material and may have more luck. Well, here's a plastic pool ladder, and it's got steps, as you would expect. And in a sense, this is like a sluice box. What you want to do is to put obstructions to the flow of the water in the box, and then as the water and the sand and the particles come passing down over the sluice box, all the heavier material, the gold, will fall down right behind the dividers in the box. And your dividers are always set up so they're 90 degrees to the flow of the water. The water comes this way down the sluice box, and the places you find your gold are right back here. Behind each one of these dividers is where the gold will deposit itself. And after a certain amount of time, as you look at your box, it will have the flat face on the upstream side, and then you'll have lots of material accumulated on the downstream side, and then another clean face on the upstream side, and more material on the downstream side. So it's kind of like you get this ripple effect with all the eroded material, or all the abraded material, I guess, on the backside. You can also notice this in stream beds. If you walk down a river that has a shallow river, you'll notice how the riverbed will form these waves, and the lines of the waves in the bottom of the river, the ripples, will be 90 degrees to the flow of the water, and it gives it just kind of a nice ripple effect. And that's what water does, just like the wind. It'll wear away the upwind or upstream side, and then it carries all the extra material to the backside. So that tells us the direction the water was coming from. And as we look at the mountains of the western United States, we can pretty much see that if they were eroded by water, it came from the east and created Yardangs. More evidence of floods in our past include a program done by NOVA called the Mega Flood. In the program, they tried to explain giant holes in the rock landscape in eastern Washington state, east of Spokane. There are areas where the ground is all solid rock, but there are these big holes that have been drilled into the rock, hundreds of feet across, who knows how big, very large. Well, they tried to explain how that could have happened. And the explanation given in Mega Flood, the name of the program, was that an ice dam had been created east of this area during the last ice age. and an enormous amount of water had built up behind this ice dam. It was several thousand feet high, and the water was being held back. Then on one day, the ice broke, and this huge wall of water, 1,000 feet high, came cascading down from the east and ground out all these holes in the rock. And the spinning action of the water as it went over the rock created vortices, and it actually ground down into the solid rock, something like what a tornado would do. And they theorized that the water was 1,000 feet high as it poured its way down to the Pacific Ocean. Well, yes, kind of. Our version is the wall of water was not 1,000 feet high, it was more than 10,000 feet high. And that wave action, the grinding action that the water caused, would definitely have caused those holes in the rock. And that water was salt water. That water was coming from the Atlantic Ocean as it moved all the way across the continent and did its thing of digging up the ground. That then might tell us that the Great Lakes around Michigan were not created by glaciers, but were created by the last big flood, the one that came from the Atlantic Ocean. And all those 10,000 lakes in Minnesota were also created by that same flood. Then, as you drive west from here in Tucson and take Interstate 8 that follows pretty much the U.S.-Mexican border down towards San Diego, it goes east and west from here. As you're entering San Diego, after you pass through the Imperial Valley, the entire landscape is covered with these enormous boulders, anywhere from the size of a house to the size of a city block. And it looks like somebody took a big bucket of water full of boulders and just poured it out on the ground, because these boulders are scattered all over the place. And it's amazing to look at. And as you think about it, those boulders are all rounded. They had to be tumbled, as you would in a rock tumbler, and they didn't just come there on their own. They kind of like had to be carried there. So then how did that happen? It would have required some kind of enormous water motion to pick up these monster boulders and then deposit them all the way down into San Diego. Another interesting part of the story involves the Hopi Indians in northwestern New Mexico. They have a legend about a time that a wall of water came through their part of New Mexico. Now, what's interesting is they're at 8,000 feet above sea level. Northern New Mexico is high. And the only people that survived were the Indians that were up in the mountains. They looked down and saw this huge wall of water come through and wash away all the people in the lowland. Where would you get a huge wall of water out in the middle of the continental United States at the 8,000 foot level? Well, the only answer could be it had to come from either the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico. We believe it came from the Atlantic. But the story is this wave of water would have started 4 miles high coming in over the eastern seaboard, but it had to travel across 2,000 miles of the North American continent, and it also had to climb 8,000 feet. So maybe by the time it got to where the Hopis were, the wall of water was only a few thousand feet high. In that case, the people at the 8,000 foot level, at ground level, could have been washed away, but the people a few thousand feet higher up in the Rockies could have looked down and watched the wave of water go by. So at this point, I'd like to wish you all aloha and a hui ho.